The Forgotten Man and the Cold Store. The sun was just beginning to rise over the city, casting a warm golden glow across the narrow streets and old brick buildings. On the corner of Langford Avenue, nestled between a rundown tailor shop and a closed-down cafe, stood an antique store called Landon's Heirlooms. It looked like something out of time. Dusty windows, faded signage, and a front door that creaked every time someone opened it. The man who owned it, Mr. Landon, was known around the neighborhood, not for his charm or helpfulness, but for his sharp tongue and colder heart. He ran his store like a museum, quiet, serious, and only for those who he thought deserved to walk in. He didn't like children. He didn't like animals. And he especially didn't like the elderly. Every morning, Mr. Landon unlocked the shop exactly at 9:00 a.m. He'd dust off the shelves, straighten up the old clocks and broken radios, and then sit behind his oak counter with a black coffee and a thick newspaper. He rarely smiled. People walked past his store, peeking in, but most didn't enter, either because they didn't dare or because they'd heard the stories. But on this morning, something unusual happened. Just before 10:00 a.m., the little bell above the door rang. An elderly man stepped in, slowly, carefully, holding onto the doorframe, as if gathering the courage to enter. His clothes were worn and loose, his shoes scuffed and tired. His hands trembled slightly as he reached for a walking stick. His face was kind, though weathered with age, and his eyes held a soft sparkle, a glimmer of curiosity and hope. Mr. Landon glanced up from his newspaper and scowled. "We don't do handouts here," he said sharply, without even asking what the man wanted. The old man smiled gently. "I'm not asking for a handout," he replied softly. "Just wanted to have a look. Might be something in here that reminds me of old times." Mr. Landon huffed. "Look quickly then. Don't touch anything." The old man nodded politely and began to wander around the store, his eyes scanning the dusty shelves. He stopped in front of a small music box. It was brass, delicately made with little flowers carved into the edges. He reached out, not to take it, but to admire it. "I used to have one just like this," he said, mostly to himself. "You break it, you buy it," Mr. Landon barked from behind the counter. The old man turned and gave a small, understanding nod. "I won't break anything, sir." The shop owner said nothing more, returning to his newspaper. But after a few more minutes, the old man walked up to the counter, pulling something from the pocket of his worn jacket. "How much for the music box?" he asked. Mr. Landon looked up again, irritated. "It's not for you," he snapped. "You can't afford it. And even if you could, I wouldn't sell it to someone like you." The store fell silent. The old man looked surprised, but not angry. More disappointed. "Someone like me," he repeated gently. "You heard me," Mr. Landon muttered. "Look, I don't know what kind of game you're playing, but people like you come in here pretending to care about these things. Then you haggle for prices and waste my time. I run a business, not a charity." Just then, the bell over the door rang again. A man stepped into the shop. Tall, in dark jeans and a plain black t-shirt, sunglasses shaded his eyes, and his hair was slightly disheveled, like he had come in a rush. He didn't speak at first, just looked around until his eyes landed on the old man near the counter. His face softened instantly. "Dad," the man said, hurrying forward. Mr. Landon blinked. The old man looked up and smiled, his first real smile that morning. "I was just looking," he said quietly. The younger man turned to Mr. Landon. He took off his sunglasses slowly. The shopkeeper's mouth fell open. It was KeanuReeves, the same KeanuReeves known around the world. Movies, interviews, fan stories of his kindness. He wasn't just a celebrity. He was a legend of humility. Mr. Landon stammered, suddenly standing from behind the counter. "Mr. Reeves, I didn't know." Keanu's face was calm, but his voice was low and serious. "This man is my father," he said, "and you insulted him. Judged him before you knew anything about him. just because of how he looked. I didn't realize. You didn't want to realize, Keanu cut in. You looked at him and decided he didn't belong. That's not how you treat people. Not anyone. There was a long silence in the store. Outside, people had started to gather. Someone had seen Keanu go in, and word was spreading fast. But inside, the air was thick with something else. Shame, regret, and a truth that couldn't be taken back. Mr. Landon swallowed hard. I'm sorry. Truly, I didn't mean. Keanu turned to his father. Come on, Dad. You don't need anything from here. The old man nodded slowly, giving the shop one last look. There's nothing here worth more than respect anyway, he said quietly. And with that, they walked out together. Mr. Landon was left standing behind his counter, staring at the brass music box still sitting there. The same one he had just refused to sell to a kind old man. A man who, as it turned out, had raised someone the whole world respected. What happened next would leave everyone completely speechless and change one life forever. The quiet history of a broken man. The air outside the antique store was thick with whispers. A few people stood frozen on the sidewalk, staring in disbelief as KeanuReeves and the elderly man walked away from Landon's heirlooms, side by side. None of them dared speak to him. Not yet. They just watched, silent witnesses to something they didn't fully understand. Keanu kept his pace slow to match his father's steps. His expression was unreadable. Calm, yes, but behind those eyes was a storm that had been waiting for years to rise. The old man, however, didn't say a word. They turned down a quiet alley and came to a small rusted gate. Behind it was a narrow staircase leading up to the second floor of an old brick building. This was where he lived. Nothing fancy. A single room with a kitchenette, a worn couch, a bookshelf that leaned to one side, and a window that let in just enough sunlight to make it feel human. As they stepped inside, Keanu helped his father to the couch. He didn't speak right away. He walked over to the small electric kettle, filled it, and turned it on. Only then did he say, Dad, why didn't you tell me you were going to that store? The old man smiled softly. You were working. I didn't want to bother you. I saw the shop all walking. Something about it felt familiar. Keanu sat down across from him. He treated you like you were nothing. I've been treated worse, the man said gently. You learn with time that people carry their own pain. Sometimes they spill it on others without even realizing. Keanu's brows drew together. That doesn't make it okay. The old man sighed. No, but it makes it easier to forgive. There was silence again, broken only by the soft bubbling of the kettle, the forgotten pages of his life. Keanu looked around the apartment. It was clean, modest, but there were signs of stories here. A photo on the shelf, a young woman holding a baby, a guitar leaning in the corner with a broken string, an old army medal in a glass frame, and beside it, a letter yellowed with age. You used to play guitar? Keanu asked. The old man nodded. A long time ago, back when your mother was still alive. Keanu's face softened. She loved music. We used to play together. She'd sing. I'd play. Sometimes we'd busk outside cafes just for fun. His eyes sparkled at the memory. We didn't have much money, but we had moments. We had laughter. What happened? Keanu asked gently. The old man was quiet for a long time. After she passed, something broke in me. Not just sadness. Something deeper. Like the world tilted and never tilted back. I tried to keep working. Tried to be strong for you. But jobs came and went. People changed. And little by little, I started pulling away. Keanu leaned forward. You never pulled away from me. No, his father said, voice soft. Never from you. But from the world, yes. I didn't trust it anymore. I saw how it chewed up good people. How it treated age like a burden. How kindness was mistaken for weakness. He paused, looking toward the window. So I stayed quiet. Invisible. Safer that way. Keanu's voice cracked just slightly. You didn't deserve to be invisible. His father smiled. It gave me time to watch you shine. To see you grow into the man your mother would have been so proud of. A truth never spoken. Keanu got up and walked to the bookshelf. He picked up the old letter, unfolding it gently. His father didn't stop him. The letter was dated over 30 years ago. It was a rejection letter from a prestigious music school. Keanu looked up. You applied? His father nodded. Before you were born, they said I had potential, but not the right appearance, not enough polish, wrong background. They didn't say it outright, but it was there, written between every line. So you gave up? No, his father said. I chose something better. I chose to build a family. I chose love. And when your mother got sick, I chose to stay by her side. I sold my guitar, bought medicine, never regretted that. Keanu's throat tightened. You sacrificed everything. That's what parents do, Keanu. And now, I get to sit in this little room and see you on the screen. Hear people talk about your kindness, your heart, your humanity. He smiled, eyes wet. You are the part of me that the world didn't reject. Keanu's hand tightened around the letter. He came back to the couch and sat beside his father. You should have told me. I didn't want you to carry my pain, his father said. You had enough of your own. Keanu nodded slowly, feeling both anger and gratitude rise in his chest. You're not invisible anymore, Dad. Echoes from the store. Meanwhile, back at Landon's Heirlooms, the air was still heavy. The store owner sat alone, staring at the music box. For the first time in years, the silence of his shop didn't feel peaceful. It felt haunting. He replayed every word in his mind. You judged him before you knew anything about him. He looked out the window. A few people still lingered outside. One of them had filmed what happened. And by the afternoon, that video would be everywhere. But none of that mattered. What mattered was the reflection in the dusty glass. He didn't see a proud businessman anymore. He saw a man who had forgotten what it meant to respect others, to listen, to care. He stood up suddenly and walked to the counter. He opened the register, pulled out the cash tray, and grabbed a small envelope from beneath it. It was marked with the words emergency fund. He placed it next to the music box. Then he stepped outside. A moment that reached millions. By the next morning, the video had gone viral. Not just because it showed KeanuReeves defending his father, but because it showed something more powerful, the quiet dignity of a man who had spent years in silence, and the son who carried his voice forward. People from all over the world shared their thoughts. This made me cry. Respect your elders. Always. Keanu is the kind of son every parent dreams of. This old man reminds me of my grandfather. He had the same kindness in his eyes. You never know who someone really is. Be kind. Always. And one comment, buried deep, simply said, the music box was never the treasure. The man was. The gift that couldn't be priced. By sunrise the next day, everything had changed. The small antique shop that once sat in silence was now flooded with attention. People gathered outside the glass windows, whispering, pointing, filming with their phones. Some came out of curiosity, others out of outrage, and many more out of admiration for a quiet elderly man and the son who stood by him with unwavering strength. But inside the store, Mr. Landon didn't speak to anyone. He sat on a stool behind the counter, hands folded, the music box in front of him, untouched. The same box the old man had admired. The same box he refused to sell. He hadn't slept, hadn't eaten. He wasn't thinking about sales or reputation or damage control. He was thinking about regret. For the first time in decades, he saw himself, not as a shop owner, but as a man who had forgotten what it meant to connect with another human being. Somewhere else in the city, KeanuReeves was making breakfast. Not something extravagant, just toast and eggs and a little coffee. His father, still dressed in the same faded cardigan from yesterday, sat at the small table, glancing occasionally toward the window. The light was soft, gentle, like the world had slowed down for them. "You don't need to stay," the old man said quietly. Keanu looked up from the stove. "I'm not leaving today. You've got a life. Work, people who need you." Keanu smiled faintly. "I need you." The words sat heavy in the room, not in a burdensome way, but like something important that had finally been spoken aloud. His father looked down, nodding slightly. "When your mother passed, I wasn't sure how to keep going. I used to think that being strong meant being silent." Keanu placed the plate on the table. "Being strong means showing up, even if you're afraid, even if you're tired." They sat in silence for a few minutes, eating slowly, savoring the simplicity of the morning. Then the knock came. It was soft, hesitant. Keanu walked to the door and opened it. Mr. Landon stood there, hat in hand, eyes tired. "I hope this isn't a bad time," he said, his voice much quieter than before. Keanu didn't answer right away. He looked back at his father, who had turned toward the door. Their eyes met. The old man nodded once. An invitation. Keanu stepped aside. Mr. Landon entered. The unexpected apology. The store owner held the music box in both hands, carefully, reverently, as if it were no longer just a thing, but something that carried weight. He placed it gently on the table. "I came to give this to you," he said, looking directly at the old man. "I should have done it yesterday." The old man didn't speak. He just studied him, quietly, waiting. "I judged you," Mr. Landon said. "I saw your clothes, your hands, your age, and I decided you weren't worth my time. I've been doing that for years. I thought I was protecting my business. But all I was doing was protecting my pride." He looked down at the music box. "When I opened my store, I told myself it was about preserving history, collecting stories. But somewhere along the line, I stopped seeing people as part of those stories." He looked up again. "You reminded me, and I'm sorry. Not because you're someone's father, not because you're famous by association, but because you're a human being, and I forgot how to treat people like that." The old man finally smiled. "Thank you." And just like that, the tension broke. Something more valuable than money. Mr. Landon stepped back, unsure of what to do with his hands. He wasn't used to vulnerability. It made him fidget, made his breathing shallow. Keanu, watching from the corner, said nothing, but there was a quiet pride in his eyes. The old man reached out and opened the music box. A soft tune played, delicate, old, haunting in the way only old music can be. His eyes glistened. "This was the same song your mother used to hum," he whispered, almost note for note. Keanu leaned closer, listening. And for a moment, it was like time folded, like the room belonged to the past, the present, and the future all at once, a lifetime of memories locked inside a melody. Grief softened by familiarity. "I can't take this," the old man said at last. "It means more now than it ever did, but it belongs with you." Mr. Landon shook his head. "It's not for sale. It's a gift." "Why?" "Because yesterday I was a man with a shop full of things and an empty heart," he said. "And today I want to be something else. Strangers with open hearts." Over the next few days, something unusual began to happen. People started visiting the shop, not because of Keanu's appearance, though that helped, but because of the story that followed. The elderly man who had been turned away. The music box. The moment of change. They came with their own stories, their own heirlooms. They came looking not just for objects, but for connection. A young woman brought in her grandmother's old sewing machine, asking if it could be restored. A boy and his father found a vintage toy train that reminded them of a lost uncle. An elderly couple donated a box of love letters they had written during the war. Mr. Landon began listening, and he started writing things down, each item's story, who it came from, what it meant. He started calling his shop something different in his heart. Not Landon's heirlooms, but stories worth saving. The video that reached across the world. 1 week later, Keanu received a letter in the mail. No return address, just a simple envelope. Inside was a printed photo of the music box, sitting in the shop window. Beneath it, a small handwritten note. Some things aren't meant to be owned, only remembered. He smiled. The world may not always reward kindness immediately, but it remembers. And sometimes, in the quiet moments, it finds its way back to those who need it most. Strangers, stories, and second chances. The days following the incident at Landon's Heirlooms began to feel different, not just for those directly involved, but for people who'd only heard about it, watched it, or felt it in ways they couldn't explain. A moment of cruelty had turned into a lesson. A quiet act of kindness had turned into a wave. And somewhere in the middle of it all, a small, dusty antique shop that had been nearly forgotten became a beacon of stories waiting to be told. The letters began arriving. It started small. A single envelope slid under the door of the shop early one morning. No name. Just 2 words written on the back in shaky handwriting. Thank you. Inside was a photograph of a man in military uniform holding a young girl in his arms. On the back of the photo, someone had written, "He raised me. I saw what happened in your store. He was like your old man, quiet, gentle, overlooked. People forgot his worth. Thank you for reminding the world." Mr. Landon stared at it for a long time. By the end of the week, there were dozens more letters, postcards from strangers, emails from countries he'd never been to. One came from a woman in Greece, another from a teenager in South Korea. People who had nothing in common except the feeling that something inside them had shifted after watching a stranger stand up for someone who couldn't or wouldn't defend himself. Some of them shared stories of their own, of being dismissed, ignored, judged by appearance, age, silence. Many of them said they hadn't spoken about these things in years. Some had never spoken about them at all. But now, they were writing, reaching out. And for the first time in his life, Mr. Landon wasn't just listening. He was hearing them, a visitor with a story of her own. One rainy afternoon, a woman walked into the shop. She was in her early 60s, her coat soaked at the edges, her gray hair tied back in a simple knot. She carried a leather satchel over her shoulder and walked with a slight limp. Mr. Landon looked up from his desk and gave her a polite nod. He'd started doing that now, greeting everyone, even the ones who looked like they might not buy anything, even the ones who looked like he used to. The woman approached the counter and gently set down a wooden box. "I heard about what happened here," she said, her voice quiet but steady. "You and everyone else." Mr. Landon replied with a small smile. "What can I do for you?" "I don't want to sell this," she said. "I just want someone to hear the story behind it." He gestured to the stool in front of the counter. "I'm listening." She opened the box carefully, revealing a cracked porcelain cup. It was plain, chipped at the rim. Not something anyone would pay money for. But her eyes softened as she looked at it. "This cup belonged to my father," she began. "He was a dishwasher all his life, never made more than a few dollars a day. But he used to come home, wash this cup, and drink his tea with the biggest smile on his face. Every single evening." She paused, running a finger along the rim. "People used to mock him, say he was wasting his life. But he used to tell me something that stuck with me forever." She looked up, her eyes glistening. He said, "Any job done with love is a job worth doing." Mr. Landon didn't speak. He couldn't. His throat had tightened. The woman smiled gently. "Thank you for making space for stories again. For people like my father." Then she stood, nodded, and left the cup behind. Meanwhile, across town, KeanuReeves had been keeping a low profile. Not because of the media, though it had certainly gotten noisy, but because he wanted the world to forget about him for a moment and remember his father instead. His father, who had spent years fading into the background, who had chosen silence over bitterness, who had raised a son on little more than wisdom, warmth, and sacrifice. They'd started taking walks again, slow ones, sometimes through the park, sometimes just around the block. They didn't speak much, but sometimes they didn't have to. One afternoon, Keanu noticed his father staring at a pair of children kicking a ball in a playground. "I used to bring you to parks like this," he said. "You had so much energy. Your mom would bring sandwiches. I'd sit on the bench and just watch." Keanu smiled. "I remember. You always had this curiosity," his father said. "Asking questions, trying to figure out why the sky was blue or how ants carry food 10 times their size." Keanu laughed. Some things never change. They walked a little further before his father stopped suddenly. "I don't want to fade away again." Keanu turned. "You won't." "I mean it," his father said. "For the first time in years, I feel like I matter again. Like my life still means something. And it's not because you're famous. It's because people saw me." Keanu nodded. "Then let's make sure they keep seeing you." A new idea is born. The next morning, Keanu made a phone call. Not to a studio, not to an agent, but to Mr. Landon. "I have an idea," he said. "You've got a shop full of objects, and now you've got stories. Why not put them together?" "What do you mean?" "Let's turn your store into a living archive. Not just things people can buy, but a place where they can come to tell stories, leave behind a piece of their history." Mr. Landon was quiet for a moment. Then he whispered, "Stories worth saving." "Exactly," Keanu said. "But let's go bigger. Let's document them. Interview people. Record their voices. Create a series of human moments that remind the world we're not alone." Mr. Landon sat back, stunned. People would actually want to do that. Keanu smiled. "They already are." One final surprise. A few days later, the storefront was painted anew. Not completely, just a fresh coat, carefully brushed, leaving the aged wood still visible beneath. A small sign was added beneath the name. "Every item has a heartbeat. Ask us to hear it." A film crew arrived the next week, small, quiet, respectful. Keanu's idea had blossomed into something greater. People could now walk in, sit down, and share their stories, each one connected to something in the shop. And in the center of it all, behind a clear glass case, sat a small brass music box. No price tag, no description, just a tiny plaque beneath it that read, "The moment that changed everything." The story the world forgot. It was a quiet Thursday morning when the envelope arrived. No stamp, no return address, just a plain manila envelope left in the shop's mailbox. Inside it was a single photograph, black and white, slightly curled at the edges. It showed a younger man, tall, lean, with deep-set eyes and a strong jawline, standing in front of a building that looked like a hospital. Beside him stood 2 children, one of them clinging to his leg. The expression on the man's face was weary but calm, and in his hand he held a small wooden toy plane. Mr. Landon flipped the photo over. Written in fading blue ink were the words, "He saved my life and never told anyone." The hidden life. KeanuReeves stood in the back of the shop, organizing a new section labeled Voices and Memories. It was part of their growing effort to turn Landon's heirlooms into more than a store. People from all over had started coming in not to shop, but to share. They sat in the corner booth with the mic. They told stories. Some cried. Some laughed. Some just sat in silence, holding onto items that carried lifetimes inside them. That's when Mr. Landon approached him with the envelope. "This just came in," he said, handing over the photo. "You might want to show it to your father." Keanu stared at it. The man in the photo was younger, but unmistakably familiar. It was his father. "He never mentioned this," Keanu said quietly. Mr. Landon nodded. Maybe he thought it wasn't worth mentioning, or maybe he just didn't think anyone would care. Keanu took a deep breath. I need to know what happened. A memory long buried. His father was sitting on the balcony when Keanu arrived that afternoon. The old man had a blanket over his legs and a cup of tea in his hands. The city hummed softly in the distance. Pigeons fluttered across rooftops. The kind of day that felt like it was waiting for something unspoken to happen. Keanu sat beside him without a word. Handed him the photo. His father's eyes lingered on it. A flicker of recognition crossed his face. Then silence. For nearly a minute. Where did you get this? He finally asked. Someone left it at the shop. No name, just that note. His father nodded slowly. I didn't think anyone remembered. Remembered what? The old man looked out at the sky for a long time before answering. The hospital fire. It was the late 70s, he began. Before you were born. I was working maintenance at a hospital up north. Night shifts. It wasn't glamorous, but it paid the bills. And your mom was pregnant, so I took every shift they offered. He sipped his tea. One night, there was an electrical fire. Started in the records room. By the time anyone noticed, smoke had already filled the east wing. Alarms didn't go off. Sprinkler system failed. Chaos. He paused, his voice quiet. I was the only one down in the basement when the smell hit. I ran up. People were panicking. Nurses trying to get patients out. Doctors screaming. No one knew how fast it was spreading. Keanu leaned forward. What did you do? His father's voice grew softer. I didn't think. I just moved. Ran into one of the pediatric rooms. Kids were stuck there. Smoke already creeping under the door. Grabbed two of them. Carried one. Held the other's hand. We got out through the kitchen hallway. He looked down at his hands, now old and trembling. I went back in twice more. Pulled out a nurse and another orderly. Collapsed just outside the stairwell. Woke up 2 days later with burned lungs and broken ribs. Keanu stared at him. Why didn't you ever tell me? What for? His father asked. The news never picked it up. The hospital buried it. No medals, no headlines, just a pat on the back and a release form. He shrugged. Your mother said something to me back then. She said, real heroes never need to be seen. They just need to keep breathing. So I did. A silent legacy. Keanu sat in silence, the weight of the story settling over him like a heavy blanket. His father had lived an entire chapter of courage and selflessness and tucked it away like an old letter in a drawer. Not out of shame, not out of bitterness, but because to him, doing good didn't require applause. You never thought the world deserved to know? Keanu finally asked. His father smiled softly. I figured, if I raised a good man, that'd be enough. Back at the shop. That night, Keanu returned to Landon's heirlooms. He held the photo in his hand. The story had to be told. Not for views, not for fame, but because somewhere out there, someone had remembered. Someone who had survived because a quiet janitor with no title and no armor had chosen to run into the fire instead of away from it. Mr. Landon helped him scan the photo and place it in a new frame. Beneath it, they placed a card with 4 words. He never told anyone. A microphone was set up in front of it. And the next day, people came. Some to look, some to cry, some to sit beside the photo and record their own stories of hidden heroes, their mothers, their grandfathers, the neighbor who checked in during storms, the stranger who helped when no one else would. And in doing so, they gave voice to a million quiet acts of courage that would otherwise fade into silence. The ripple effect. Soon, a journalist caught wind of the story. Not the celebrity angle, but the forgotten fire. After some digging, hospital records were found. Damaged, but intact. Fire logs confirmed his father's presence. Interviews with former staff slowly surfaced. One of the children saved had grown up to be a teacher. Another had become a paramedic. They all remembered. And in a quiet ceremony weeks later, the city presented Keanu's father with a recognition plaque. not a grand award, just a small gesture, surrounded by people who now knew the truth. His hands trembled as he accepted it, not from age, but from emotion he had long buried. Not every hero wears a spotlight. The plaque was displayed next to the music box in the shop, under a new section called The Quiet Ones. Keanu stood beside his father during the opening, and as people filtered through, reading, remembering, some of them crying, others simply holding their breath, Keanu leaned close to him and said, "You've changed more lives than you know." His father smiled. "I didn't do it to change lives," he whispered. "I did it because it was right." And in that moment, the story the world had forgotten became the story it would never forget again. The man who returned from silence. It had been nearly a month since the music box had played its tune in the corner of the small antique shop, but the echo of that melody still lingered in the hearts of everyone who had heard it. It wasn't just a song anymore. It was a memory stitched into the rhythm of people's days. And the man behind that story, the elderly father no one had noticed before, was no longer invisible. He had become something rare in a world full of noise. He had become a voice people leaned in to hear. A new morning, a new name. The morning light was soft through the windows of Landon's heirlooms, but something inside the shop had changed. Not the furniture, not the walls, but the air itself. It felt warmer, fuller, like the stories now carried a heartbeat of their own. Above the front counter, a new wooden sign had been hung. It read, "The Storykeeper's Table." Under it sat a chair, and in that chair, almost every afternoon, sat Keanu's father. Not as a shop assistant, not as a display, but as a storyteller. People came in now not just for heirlooms, not just for the recordings, but to speak with him, to listen, to ask questions, to share. He had become the voice of the place, in a world that so often forgets the quiet ones. Mr. Landon watched from behind the counter with quiet admiration. The man he had once turned away was now the very soul of his shop, and the man who had once spoken in whispers now held a room with every word. The woman with the suitcase on a rainy afternoon, a young woman, came into the shop. She looked around 30, her hair tied in a messy bun, a worn leather suitcase in one hand. She was soaked from the rain, but her eyes were full of urgency. "Is he here?" she asked breathlessly. "The man from the video." Mr. Landon pointed toward the corner where Keanu's father sat, polishing a pair of old spectacles someone had donated just that morning. The woman approached slowly, her voice catching as she spoke. "Sir," she said, "you don't know me, but I think you saved my mother." He looked up, eyes soft. "You worked at the hospital," she said. "I found a photograph. My mom kept it in a drawer her whole life. It was you." Holding her hand. She was just a little girl then. She said a man pulled her from the smoke, gave her a toy plane to calm her down, and told her she'd be okay. She never forgot that. His fingers froze over the spectacles. "She died last year," the woman said, voice trembling. "But she left me that photo and told me to find you. She said, if I ever met you, I should thank you for giving her a second life." Tears slipped down his cheeks, not from sadness, but from the weight of being remembered. He nodded slowly, and for a long moment, they just sat in silence, two strangers, connected by a moment decades old, one that neither of them had lived completely, but both had carried forever. Ripples in the world. The story had started as a whisper, now it was a current. News stations came and went, but none of them captured it right. Not the fame, not the viral video. The real story was in the quiet. A school teacher from Montreal brought her class to the shop on a field trip. A grandfather from Chicago sent a recorded message asking if his story could be archived beside the music box. A woman from Japan translated her grandmother's diary and mailed it in, asking that it be placed with the others under the Quiet One section. KeanuReeves watched all of this unfold not from the front lines, but from the sidelines, just as his father had done for most of his life. He had no need to stand at the center of attention, because now The spotlight was exactly where it needed to be. The first night of stories. On the first Saturday of spring, the shop hosted its first night of stories. String lights were hung across the rafters. Folding chairs were placed in a circle. Candles were lit in memory of all the forgotten heroes who had gone unspoken for too long. And in the center, as dusk settled over the city, Keanu's father stood with a microphone in his hand. His voice was calm, gravelly, rich with time. "My name," he began, "is Jonas." It was the first time most people had ever heard his name. Not just Keanu's father, not just the old man from the video, but Jonas. "I spent most of my life thinking I didn't matter much," he continued. "I wasn't rich. I wasn't famous. I wasn't anyone the world would notice. I cleaned floors, fixed lights, kept things running in the background." He paused, glancing at the faces around him. "But I've learned something recently. That sometimes the ones in the background are the ones who keep everything from falling apart. And maybe their stories matter too." You could hear a pin drop. And then, as if one voice wasn't enough, others stood. One by one, strangers became storytellers. A mother who worked nights in a diner spoke about the homeless man who once gave her his coat. A man in a wheelchair talked about the janitor who made him feel like royalty in middle school. A child no older than 10 told a story about her dog saving her from a fire. Every voice, once hidden, now heard. Keanu's moment. At the end of the night, Keanu stood beside his father. He didn't take the mic. He didn't give a speech. He simply put a hand on his father's shoulder and said, "You taught me everything. Not with words, but with how you lived." Jonas looked at him and smiled. "And now you're teaching me," he said, "to be seen again." A final act of healing. Back home that night, Jonas sat with a blank journal in his lap. One Keanu had given him weeks before, encouraging him to write again. He opened it slowly and began on the first page. "I once believed silence was strength. Now I believe strength is sharing your silence with someone who will listen." He wrote for hours. His hands shook, but his heart was steady. He wrote about the fire. He wrote about the hospital. He wrote about losing his wife, about raising a son with nothing but dignity, and about the music box that brought his memories back to life. And when he was done with the first page, he did something he hadn't done in decades. He signed his name. Jonas Reeves. The legacy we leave behind. It was a year to the day since Jonas Reeves had first stepped into Landon's heirlooms. That morning, as the sun rose and painted the storefront gold, Mr. Landon unlocked the door with a steady hand. He had grown used to seeing new faces, strangers who traveled from across the city, the country, even the world to visit the shop that had become something more than a store. It had become a sanctuary. Inside, things looked different than they had a year ago. The shelves were still lined with antique clocks, music boxes, and vintage radios. But now, each item carried a story. A card was tucked beside every piece, telling who had owned it, where it came from, and what it had meant to the person who left it behind. The walls held photographs of smiling faces, faded love letters, and sketches done by children who had passed through. And in the very center of the shop was the heart of it all, the music box, still playing its soft, haunting tune. Jonas's final story. Jonas Reeves had changed in that year. Not just physically, though he stood a little straighter now, his movements more sure, but in the way he carried himself. He was no longer the quiet man who avoided attention. He had found his voice. Not a loud one, not the kind that demanded the room's focus, but a steady, calm voice that people leaned in to hear. He had become the storyteller. Every Saturday, people gathered at the shop for an evening of shared memories. Jonas was always the first to speak. He would tell a story about a kindness he'd witnessed decades ago, or a lesson he'd learned from someone long gone. Then he would step aside, inviting others to share. They came from all walks of life. Teachers, bus drivers, musicians, students, and they all had something in common. They had felt invisible, and now they were seen. That final Saturday, Jonas shared a story he had never told before. It was about the first time he felt true forgiveness. "I was 19, he began. Young, angry, stubborn. There was a man, my father. He wasn't a kind man. He was harsh, unyielding. He thought being hard on me would make me strong." The room was silent, the warm light from the overhead strings casting soft shadows. One day, after he'd yelled at me for something small, something I can't even remember now, I stormed out, left home, didn't speak to him for years. I built a life without him, thinking I didn't need his approval. But when he passed, something inside me cracked. Jonas paused, his voice low and steady. I found an old letter he'd written but never sent. It was an apology. Not perfect, not poetic, but real. He wanted me to know he'd been wrong, that he was proud of me. He looked at the audience, his eyes clear. Forgiving him wasn't easy. It didn't happen all at once. But when I finally let go of the anger, I felt lighter. And I realized something. Forgiveness isn't about the other person. It's about setting yourself free. Keanu's quiet support. Keanu sat at the back of the room, watching his father speak. He had been there every Saturday since the first night, though he rarely spoke himself. This wasn't his story, it was Jonas's. And that's how he wanted it to be. He'd become something of a fixture in the shop, helping to organize the growing collection of stories, arranging photos, cataloging audio recordings. People came up to him often, thanking him, but he always turned the conversation back to his father. "This is his legacy," he would say. "I'm just helping it along." Keanu knew that his father's courage to share his life had created something larger than either of them could have imagined. What had started as a single moment, standing up to a rude shop owner, had become a movement. People from around the world were now sharing their own quiet acts of bravery, their hidden moments of kindness, their forgotten stories of love and loss. The final night. On the anniversary of Jonas's first visit to Landon's Heirlooms, the shop hosted its largest gathering yet. People filled the room, standing shoulder to shoulder. Cameras from small independent film crews recorded the event. Someone had even set up a live stream for those who couldn't attend in person. Jonas stood before the crowd, his hands resting on the music box. "A year ago," he said, his voice strong and clear, "I walked into this shop feeling like a man without a place. Like my time had passed, and my story didn't matter anymore. But you all proved me wrong. You showed me that no one's story is too small to be heard, that no act of kindness is too quiet to be remembered." He took a deep breath. "Thank you for listening, for sharing, for giving me the chance to be part of something greater than myself." The room erupted into applause, not thunderous, but warm, like a wave of gratitude washing over everyone. And then, for the first time, Keanu stepped forward. A son's tribute. He didn't take the mic. Instead, he knelt beside his father and placed a hand on his shoulder. "You've always been my hero," he said quietly, just loud enough for those near the front to hear. "Not because of the things you did, but because of the way you did them. With humility, with grace, with a strength I've never seen in anyone else." Jonas smiled, tears glistening in his eyes. "You taught me," Keanu continued, "that being a hero isn't about being in the spotlight. It's about showing up. It's about doing what's right, even when no one's watching. And you did that every single day of your life." The crowd was silent, moved by the honesty of the moment. Keanu stood, helping his father to his feet. "Tonight," Keanu said, "we celebrate all of you. Every story told here, every memory shared, every act of kindness remembered. This isn't just a shop anymore. It's a place where people become part of something bigger, a place where every voice matters." He turned to Jonas and nodded. "And it's all because of you. The lasting legacy." Over the next months, the Story Keepers table became more than just a local phenomenon. It inspired similar gatherings in other cities. Libraries began hosting story nights. Small museums added quiet corners where visitors could leave their own memories. A foundation was even started in Jonas's name to preserve oral histories from everyday people. But Jonas himself, he remained the same. He still sat at the shop on Saturday nights, still polished the music box every morning, still listened to anyone who needed to be heard. And though he never sought fame, he became something greater. A living reminder that no life is too small, no voice too soft, no story too quiet to matter.